His heart, quite literally, lies buried beneath a tree in Africa. Why would a man choose such a fate? Why would he sacrifice everything, comfort, family, even his very life, to venture into uncharted wilderness, face unspeakable dangers, and vanish from the world for years? This isn't just the story of an explorer. It's the epic saga of David Livingstone, a man whose unshakable faith and relentless pursuit of justice reshaped a continent and ignited a global movement against one of humanity's darkest evils. What began as a missionary call evolved into an obsession to map the unknown, expose the horrors of the slave trade, and open Africa to the world. But his journey was far from a triumph. It was a brutal dance with death, disease, and despair, punctuated by moments of breathtaking discovery and profound personal loss. If you've ever wondered about the true cost of making an impact, or how one life can alter the course of history, then this is a story you need to hear. The wind whipping across the barren hills of Blantyre, Scotland, in 1813 mirrored the harsh realities young David Livingstone was born into. His was a life not of privilege, but of grit. The air in Blantyre often carried the acrid scent of coal smoke and the distant, rhythmic thrum of machinery, sounds that would become the relentless soundtrack of his early existence. His family, though poor, possessed a rich inheritance of integrity and a deep-seated Protestant faith, values instilled by his grandfather, a small farmer who believed that hard work and honest living were pathways to grace. David's childhood was a Spartan apprenticeship in endurance. At the tender age of 10, an age when most boys were still dreaming of adventure, of chasing rabbits through fallow fields or deciphering the mysteries of a stream, David was already toiling in a cotton mill. He would strap on his leather apron at 6 a.m., the faint morning light barely piercing the factory windows, and work 12-hour shifts. The mill was a cavern of clanking metal, roaring looms, and the suffocating fluff of cotton motes that clung to everything, coating his hair, his clothes, and filling his lungs. The work was mindless repetition, a monotonous choreography of stooping, bending, and mending, snapped threads on colossal, hungry machines that dwarfed the small, nimble hands of the children operating them. Exhaustion was a constant companion, a dull ache in his bones, a fog in his young mind. But even amidst the deafening roar of machinery and the suffocating dust, a different kind of fire burned within him. It was a fire of insatiable curiosity, a voracious hunger for knowledge that refused to be extinguished by grime or fatigue. With part of his first week's wages, earned through back-breaking labor and aching fingers, he bought a Latin grammar. Imagine this, studying grammars strapped to the spinning jenny, the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of the machine, a bizarre counterpoint to the ancient Roman tongue he was attempting to master. He would snatch pages from books, history, theology, science, whatever he could lay his hands on, to read during precious lunch breaks, his meager meal often forgotten as he devoured words. After 12 hours in the mill, while most adults yearned for their beds, David attended night school from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., then returned home to continue his studies until midnight or later, often with a book propped open on his bed, illuminated by a flickering candle. This wasn't merely ambition. It was a relentless pursuit of understanding, a testament to an iron will forged in the crucibles of both industrial labor and intellectual yearning. The world outside the mill, a world of distant lands, diverse peoples, and scientific marvels, was vast and mysterious, and young David felt an undeniable pull towards it, a whisper of a destiny far beyond cloth and cog. His parents, devout and hard-working, instilled in him a deep Calvinist faith and a love for nature, which he found in the brief respite of walks through the Scottish countryside. The stern doctrines of predestination and divine sovereignty were softened by the grandeur of God's creation, seen in the rugged hills and winding rivers. He devoured tales of exploration, especially Captain Cook's voyages, his imagination ignited by detailed maps and descriptions of exotic islands and unfamiliar cultures. Cook's scientific curiosity and relentless drive to fill in the blank spaces on the map resonated deeply with David's own budding intellect. But it was the spiritual sermons and missionary accounts, particularly those from the London Missionary Society, that truly anchored his heart and gave direction to his burgeoning sense of purpose. He read about medical missions in China, tales of doctors bringing healing to distant lands while also sharing the Christian message, and felt a profound conviction he needed to be a medical missionary. It was a radical idea in early 19th century Scotland, a bold departure from the traditional paths available to a working-class boy. But David, fueled by faith and an iron will, knew his path. He began saving every penny, meticulously planning, denying himself even small comforts. By 1836, at 23, he had accumulated enough to enroll in medical school in Glasgow, simultaneously taking theological courses at Anderson's College. The transition was not easy. The formal academic environment was a stark contrast to the self-taught methods of the mill. Yet, his discipline saw him through. He qualified as a licentiate of the Faculty of Physicians and Surgeons in 1840, having not only mastered anatomy and medicine, but also deepened his understanding of scripture and theology. The mill had shaped his body, giving him a lean, enduring frame and a constitution hardened by hardship. But the library and his unwavering faith had shaped his soul, preparing him for a calling far grander than he could yet imagine. China was his initial target, its vast, ancient civilization a compelling arena for his dual mission of healing and evangelism. However, God, as often happens, had other plans. The devastating Opium Wars closed China's doors to the outside world, specifically to foreign missionaries, just as Livingstone was preparing to embark. It was then, in 1840, that fate, or Providence, intervened in the form of Robert Moffat, an esteemed Scottish missionary who had just returned from South Africa after more than 2 decades of dedicated service at Kuruman. Livingstone met Moffat at a mission deputation in London, a bustling city a world away from the quiet seriousness of Blantyre. Moffat was a man of imposing presence, his face tanned and weathered by the African sun, his eyes alight with the passion of his life's work. He painted a vivid picture of a vast, unreached continent, a land of unparalleled beauty and immense spiritual need. His voice, resonant with experience, filled the room. "I have seen," Moffat told him, his gaze piercing, "the smoke of 1,000 villages where no missionary has ever been." These words struck Livingstone with the force of a divine summons. They were not merely an invitation, they were a revelation. All the scattered threads of his life, his medical skills, his theological training, his explorer's spirit, his yearning for purpose, suddenly wove together. He saw in his mind's eye the curling tendrils of smoke rising against a boundless horizon, each plume representing a community waiting, unknown and untouched. Livingstone knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones and echoed the whispers of destiny he'd felt since boyhood, that his path now lay in the heart of Africa. The closure of China's doors was no longer a setback but a redirection. He would go where no European had gone, not for conquest, but for compassion and truth. But a far greater wilderness awaited him than any Scottish mountain pass, a wilderness that would test his body, mind, and spirit to their absolute breaking point. On December 8, 1840, David Livingstone boarded the ship George, bound for the Cape of Good Hope. The departure was a wrenching farewell to everything familiar, his family, the gray skies of Scotland, the very language he spoke. Yet, there was also a profound sense of exhilaration. He spent the 3-month voyage diligently studying navigation, astronomy, and medicine, practicing his medical skills on sick crew members, and learning rudimentary Sesotho and other African dialects from a few knowledgeable passengers. He was a man preparing himself, like a soldier sharpening his blade for battle. The ocean voyage itself was an initiation, a slow shedding of his old self. He endured seasickness, the vast monotony of the open ocean, and moments of quiet contemplation under star-pricked skies, reaffirming his commitment to the enormous task ahead. He arrived in South Africa in March 1841, stepping ashore at Cape Town, a vibrant, bustling port city framed by the majestic Table Mountain. The sensory assault was immediate, the brilliant, unfiltered sunlight, the heady scent of exotic flora, the cacophony of languages from diverse peoples, Dutch settlers, indigenous Khoisan, Xhosa, Malay slaves. It was a kaleidoscope of humanity, a world away from the industrial gloom of Blantyre. Here, he felt the true weight of the continent's promise and its challenges. His destination was Kuruman, Robert Moffat's established mission station, located over 700 miles inland in what is now modern-day Botswana. The journey to Kuruman already hinted at the scale of the challenge that lay ahead. It was weeks of arduous ox wagon travel through harsh, unforgiving terrain. The wagons creaked and groaned under the relentless sun, forging paths through vast, arid savannas where thorny acacia trees dotted the landscape and mirages shimmered on the horizon. Dust was a constant companion, coating everything in a fine red powder. Nights were spent under a canopy of stars so brilliant they seemed impossibly close, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets, the distant howl of a hyena, or the guttural roar of a lion, sounds that underscored his utter isolation and the raw power of nature. Livingstone quickly learned the rhythms of African travel, the slow, deliberate pace of the oxen, the importance of finding waterholes, the essential skills of hunting for food and mending broken wagon wheels. He began to learn more about the local Setswana language, aided by the guides who accompanied them. He observed the resilience of the indigenous people, their knowledge of the land, and their intricate social structures. He arrived at Kuruman to find a thriving, albeit isolated, European-style settlement. It boasted a church, a school, workshops, and cultivated fields, a testament to Moffat's tireless work. Kuruman offered a glimpse of established missionary life, a bastion of European civilization in the African bush. He found a community dedicated to preaching, teaching, and translating the Bible into Setswana. He settled into the routine, applied his medical skills, and even began to preach. Yet, Livingstone quickly grew restless. The comfortable, ordered life of Kuruman, while important, seemed insufficient. He hadn't come to sit in a settled village to tend to a flock already gathered. The smoke of 1,000 villages resonated in his ears, a constant, insistent call. His deep-seated conviction was to push beyond the frontiers, to reach those who had never heard the gospel, to apply his medical knowledge where it was most needed, and to map the vast, unknown stretches of the continent. He saw Kuruman as a base, not a destination. He believed that the concentrated efforts of a few missionaries in one place meant millions elsewhere remained untouched. His vision was broader, more expansive. He recognized that while spiritual conversion was paramount, it often followed practical help in the opening of trade routes, which could also undermine the existing slave trade that periodically cast its dark shadow even in these remote areas. He spent 2 years at Kuruman, observing, learning, and planning. He honed his language skills, studied local customs, and made tentative excursions into the neighboring territories to test the waters. His independent spirit, nurtured in the mill and on his solitary academic nights, chafed at the confines of Kuruman. He confided his growing desire to push north to Robert Moffat, who, though understanding of the zeal of youth, urged caution. Moffat had spent decades painstakingly building Kuruman, but Livingstone's resolve was unwavering. He wanted to establish his own mission, an outpost truly on the frontier, a springboard into the vast, uncharted interior. He chose a location approximately 200 miles north of Kuruman, a place called Mabotsa, amongst the Bakatla tribe. In 1843, Livingstone moved to Mabotsa, eager to begin his truly independent missionary work. Here, he experienced the full challenge of frontier life. He was not just a preacher or a doctor. He was an architect, a farmer, a diplomat. He negotiated with Chief Saichiro to establish his station, helping the tribe dig irrigation channels and teaching them new agricultural techniques. His medical skills quickly earned him respect and trust among the Bakatla, treating everything from snake bites to fevers. He lived amongst the people, learned their language, and immersed himself in their culture, recognizing that genuine connection was essential for any spiritual message to take root. It was at Mabotsa in 1844 that Livingstone had a life-altering encounter that would leave him permanently marked. The village was plagued by lions, which were preying on the Bakatla's cattle. Livingstone, ever the pragmatist and wanting to aid the community, accompanied the villagers on a hunt. As they tracked a particularly troublesome lion, it suddenly sprang from an ambush. Livingstone fired his rifle, but it merely wounded the beast. In a terrifying moment, the lion turned on him, seizing his left arm in its powerful jaws. The force was immense, shaking him like a rag doll, crushing the bone. Mercifully, the lion then turned its attention to a local man, Mbalwi, giving others time to intervene and kill the animal. Livingstone's arm was shattered, and though he managed to set it himself, it healed incorrectly, leaving him with a lifelong disability, a pseudoarthrosis, meaning the bones never properly fused. He could never again raise his left arm above his shoulder. This injury was a brutal reminder of the untamed savagery of Africa, a physical testament to the dangers of his chosen path. But rather than deterring him, it seemed to strengthen his resolve, forging an even deeper bond of respect with the Bakatla who witnessed his courage and resilience. Despite this harrowing incident, Livingstone continued his work, though he soon became convinced that Mabotsa was not the ideal location due to chieftaincy disputes. In 1845, he moved again, this time establishing a new mission station at Chonuane, also amidst the Bakwena tribe. Here, he deepened his understanding of African spiritual traditions, observing the rain-making rituals and the deep belief systems that governed the lives of the people. It was during this period of constant movement and adaptation that his personal life also took a significant turn. While at Kuruman, he had fallen for Robert Moffat's eldest daughter, Mary. A formidable woman in her own right, Mary had grown up in Africa, spoke Setswana fluently, and understood the rigors of missionary life. Their courtship was conducted amidst the dust and isolation of the frontier. She was practical, hardy, and shared his faith, but she was also aware of the immense sacrifices required to follow a man like David. They were married in 1845. Mary became his indispensable partner, not only providing domestic stability but also actively participating in the mission. She helped with teaching, managing the household in extremely challenging conditions, and acting as an interpreter. Together, they moved once more in 1847 to Kolobeng, a place Livingstone believed offered better water sources and a more strategic location for further exploration to the north. At Kolobeng, Livingstone had a unique relationship with the local chief, Sekele. A man of intelligence and curiosity, Sekele became Livingstone's most celebrated convert. He immersed himself in reading the Bible, eventually learning to read and write Setswana, a skill Livingstone tirelessly taught him. Sekele's conversion was a triumph, but it was also fraught with complexities. A chief of his stature was traditionally polygamous, and Livingstone insisted that he divorce all but one of his wives, an act that caused significant social upheaval within the tribe and challenged deeply ingrained customs. This experience forced Livingstone to grapple with the delicate balance between Christian doctrine and cultural traditions, revealing the profound difficulties of true conversion. He realized that changing hearts and minds was far more intricate than simply delivering sermons. During these years at Kolobeng, Livingstone and Mary began their family. Their children, Robert, Agnes, Thomas, Elizabeth, and Anna Mary, were born into the harsh realities of the African wilderness. Each birth was a fragile miracle, shadowed by the constant threat of disease, infant mortality, and the relentless heat. Mary, accustomed to the frontier, did her best to create a home, but the struggle was immense. Livingstone's heart was torn between his duty as a father and husband and the ever-present call of the unreached interior. The persistent drought that plagued Kolobeng made life increasingly difficult, pushing the limits of their endurance and exacerbating tensions with the local populace who saw the lack of rain as a punishment for abandoning traditional ways. It was at Kolobeng that Livingstone's vision began to evolve more explicitly beyond that of a traditional missionary. He observed the relentless westward expansion of the Boer settlers, descendants of Dutch colonists who viewed the indigenous African tribes with suspicion and disdain, often seizing land and enslaving people. These Boers considered Livingstone's work among the Bakwena as interference and a threat to their perceived dominance. His unwavering defense of the African people against injustices and his vociferous condemnation of the nascent slave trade that was beginning to creep into the region brought him into direct conflict with them. He saw how the Boers' presence destabilized communities and drove tribes further into the interior, making the work of evangelism even harder. He began to believe that the key to genuinely transforming Africa lay not just in direct conversion, but in opening the continent through what he termed the 3 C's: Christianity, commerce, and civilization. He envisioned navigable rivers and trade routes that would bring legitimate goods, thereby displacing the nefarious trade in human beings, and concomitantly allow missionaries and educators to penetrate deeper. To achieve this, he realized, he needed to explore, to map, to discover the very pathways into the unknown heart of Africa. The geographical exploration, once a side interest, became central to his missionary strategy. The tension with the Boers escalated sharply. They saw him as an agitator, an enemy of their way of life. In 1852, while Livingstone was away on an exploratory journey, a commando of Boer settlers attacked Kolobeng. They ransacked the mission, destroying his home, his precious library, the very tools of his intellectual life, and confiscating his meager possessions, including medicine and equipment. Chief Sekele's village was also attacked, cattle stolen, and many Bakwena were captured or killed. It was a devastating blow, a deliberate attempt to cripple Livingstone's work and presence in the region. The destruction of Kolobeng was not just a personal loss, it was a profound turning point. It solidified Livingstone's conviction that establishing settled mission stations on the frontier was futile, impossible in the face of such hostility and the encroaching presence of external forces of oppression. To truly make a difference, he had to go beyond, to find routes that bypassed these destructive influences, to expose the root causes of suffering, particularly the slave trade, that were yet unseen by the outside world. The attack on Kolobeng, coupled with the constant dangers and the deteriorating health of his growing family, forced Livingstone to confront an agonizing decision. Mary, though resilient, had suffered greatly, enduring malaria, privation, and the immense mental strain of raising children in such isolation. She had lost an infant daughter, Elizabeth, to illness. Livingstone knew that his continued ambition to push deeper into the unknown would put his family at unacceptable risk. The interior of Africa was too dangerous, too unhealthy for European women and children. With a heavy heart, with every fiber of his being protesting the separation, he made the agonizing choice to send Mary and their children back to England. It was a sacrifice that tore at his soul, a wound that would never fully heal. The farewell, a silent, tearful separation in the dusty plains near Cape Town, was perhaps the greatest personal cost he would pay for his calling. Mary, though she understood the necessity, felt the keen edge of abandonment, a conflict that would shadow their future relationship. But this profound personal sacrifice, this act of wrenching separation, also liberated him in a way. Now, unencumbered by the immediate responsibilities of family life on the frontier, he was free to pursue the dream that had been steadily growing within him, to find a path to the interior, to discover the great inland waterways that might serve as highways for the 3 seas, and most importantly, to expose the horrors of the slave trade at its source, deep within the continent. His objective was no longer localized evangelism, but continental transformation. He would become not just a missionary, but an explorer, a cartographer, a crusader against injustice, a beacon for a continent shrouded in mystery. With his eyes fixed on the distant horizons, Livingstone turned his back on the familiar, on comfort, on family, and stepped into the vast, unknown heart of Africa. He carried with him his medical kit, his navigation instruments, his Bible, and an unshakable faith in his divine mission, ready to confront whatever trials the wilderness might inflict. The world had yet to learn the name of the man who would walk from one coast to the other, driven by an almost superhuman resolve, charting the course of an entire continent's destiny.